is the Women in Tax Forum. Before we start and I turn it over to our amazing moderator, Lauren Pons, I want to thank our sponsor, Miller & Chevalier. I haven't introduced myself. I'm Heather Fincher. I'm chair of the Women in Tax Forum. This is a group, a new group this year with the ABA. In the next hour, we are honored to have extraordinary panelists join us to start a discussion around how do we effectuate positive change through allyship. Companies are asking, like, what do we do? Like, what should we do? How can we make a difference? And it can be really overwhelming sometimes. And it just starts with focusing on one aspect of how we believe we can move the needle. And that's why we've chosen and we're focusing on allyship, because we believe that is one area that we can make a real difference for women of color in tax in particular. And that's our focus today. I'm just so grateful for our moderator, Lauren Pons. When I reached out to her, she has just been, so she's super powerful woman, very successful tax professional. And she's been graceful and kind. And we hardly knew we met once before this experience. And I feel like she's one of the most beautiful human beings that I've met. So Lauren, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I thank you for all of your efforts in putting this together. And thank you for leading us in this discussion.
Thank you, Heather. That was a very, very sweet and extremely flattering introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you for reaching out to me. I was not expecting to be able to have a voice in this kind of space, so I appreciate you giving me and our panelists the platform to discuss this very important topic. So we thought we would start by kind of going around and discussing what we feel allyship is and what it means to us. And I thought it would also help to give kind of a general definition of what allyship is, so that we are all at least operating from the same viewpoint when we realize what we're talking about here. So, and we've heard allyship and being an ally a lot in the last month or so, but really it's more than being a friend or understanding or compassionate, you know, and having some empathy around the issues we're talking about here. It really means carrying water for someone and taking on their burden as your own. And as we talk about what that means in the workplace specifically, it's really, I think of it as trying to help people not only get in the door in terms of having a tax career, but also helping them flourish and thrive once they are within the organization. So what allyship is not is blaming or shaming. We're talking about taking responsibility and ownership and really being an active voice and an active participant in helping people establish successful careers. So I'm going to pass it on to our first panelist. We're going to go in ABC order here. So Nita, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and giving us a little bit about what you view allyship to be.
Happy to, Lauren. Hope everyone can hear me. Happy Friday. My name is Nita Asher, and I'm a principal at PwC, the International Tax Group, National Tax Services, based in DC. And I'm honored to be part of this panel. So thank you, Lauren and Heather, for reaching out. I think it's a very important topic that's worth pulling together a panel in short order. And I've been thinking about what allyship means to me. And, you know, when I think about the word ally, I, you know, feel like it requires helping others. And then allyship together is sharing common interest with who you're trying to help. And the commonality in the current moment, to me, I can't help but think of what I'm seeing in form of graffiti, t-shirts. I don't know how to explain that you should care about other people. That's the common interest right now that I think we all should have. So not only in a professional setting, but also in a personal setting. And I do believe just having a common interest of helping others, which I truly believe, maybe it's just the optimist that I am, we all want to help each other, but really focusing and asking the question, how can I do it? So That's what allyship means to me. So passing the mic, the virtual mic, to the next person on the list. Where do we go from here?
We're going to go to May. Thank you, Nita.
Hey, thank you very much, Nita, and that's very well said. And I too have been, after I've been asked to be on the panel with these impressive women, been giving also some serious thought to what allyship means. And I think sort of in a long sentence, I would say that allyship is sort of trusting and supporting and encouraging each one of us, each one of our differences, and in the end, really to just make sure that we have the foresight and the compassion and the will. So those are big words, right? But really, it's the will to be an ally to each other, and it doesn't just stop with the thought or with sort of dedicated goals. It's really an everyday thing, and it's something that we need to think about and incorporate into our sort of our daily lives to support each other as an ally. Is it Vanessa?
Next to Shelley.
Gotcha.
Thank you, May.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shelley Moy-Lipnick, and I lead tax policy for Novartis. For those that do not know who we are a big Swiss pharmaceutical company. It has been, I think, very trying couple of months, but with recent events, I think this is so timely. So I want to thank Heather and Lauren for pulling this together and for all your interest on the phone. I was thinking a lot about when Lauren and Heather asked this question, and I think allyship has happened in different bits and parts in my career personally, but thinking about it more, I was thinking about what is effective allyship, right? Nita sort of touched upon it, and I was like sort of spinning in my own circle, like, how do we do that? And I think we had a recent event on Juneteenth. Being a Swiss pharmaceutical company, I was surprised we dedicated a 2-hour webinar, and it was very honest, and it's just not a moment in time. We will continue this conversation as a company, but they talked a lot about mentorship and sponsorship, and they're different things. And I think allyship needs to be really ingrained in those two pieces. They mean different things, but equally important. And I'm just so glad that you guys pulled this together and we had this opportunity to have this discussion. And hopefully in the future, we could work together and continue not just a conversation, but actually action in this area. And I think the next person may be Vanessa.
Lisandra.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're like really bad at this.
I will get it right because it will be Vanessa after me.
Oh, okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisandra Ortiz. I'm a senior associate at Miller & Chevalier. I've been there for since I joined the firm right after law school, and I've been there now for almost 6 years. And I've been thinking a lot ahead of this event about what allyship means to me and like who my allies have been over time during my career. And I think I arrived at the conclusion that really allyship could take many different forms. There is no one mold for who an ally should be or what an ally should be doing. And I think, in my own experience, like who my allies have been over time really, has changed throughout my career. So from the perspective of a, first-year associate at a law firm, it may be the more senior associate that is guiding you and navigating, helping you navigate your new, organization and getting to know people. As you become more senior, it may be your sponsor or mentor, as Shelley was just talking about, that may have a more influential voice and help you really assess sort of your career path and possibly, helping you build a business case for partnership or whatever the next step is for you within your organization. And so after thinking through all of that, I think, the essence to me of allyship is sort of being supportive. And this is something that my fellow panelists have already alluded to, right? So like actually supporting people in whatever moment you're able to support them or whatever phase of their career they are in. And the second sort of realization I had is, any one of us could be an ally. we don't have to leave it up for the leaders within our organization to be the allies just because they may have a more influential position. I can be an ally to someone else, and I think that applies in the work environment and really beyond that. And now it's Vanessa's turn.
Thank you. And I also want to thank Heather and Lauren. You've done a great job pulling this whole thing together, and I'm really excited to be on the panel. My name is Vanessa Scott. I'm a partner in the tax group at Evershed Sutherland. I'm in the Washington. Well, I'm not literally in the Washington office, but I am resident in the Washington office, and I specialize in ERISA and employee benefits, and I'm also the U.S. Diversity and Inclusion Officer for our U.S. offices. So in preparation for the panel and thinking about the question of allyship, and I've gone back and forth about how much I like the term, and I think or dislike the term. There's certain things that I was like, well, you know, I think I've come to a place where I realize that there's a lot of value in the term allyship because it can be very broad and encompass a lot of different situations. It can be, you know, diverse as we are, whether we're talking about women of color, tech professionals, whatever. It's a term that can really encompass a lot of different relationships and interactions. But for me, when I think about people who have been allies in my career, I think what it's boiled down to is their allyship has meant leveraging their power for me when I'm not in the room, or for me when they're in spaces that I'm not able to be in. Sometimes spaces that I may not even know about. But leveraging that power that you have on behalf of someone, not necessarily because they don't have as much power as you do, because I feel like I have allies who are my sort of partner peers, right? They're same year as me, maybe a year older, maybe a year or two younger, but they're also allies for me because they can be in spaces sometimes that I'm not in, and they can leverage their power in that space, and sometimes speak with my words, but use their voice. And that takes a relationship, right? You don't have to be best friends. I have people who have been huge allies in my career and I've worked with twice, but they have leveraged their power in a space where it really made a difference, and it challenged the way that systems worked. And it challenged the way that people thought about how these systems and structures create obstacles sometimes for women, people of color, LGBTQ people, and challenge that using their power in a certain space. So, so that's sort of how I think about it globally.
Thank you, Vanessa. That's great. We have so many good ideas that just came out of the first 15 minutes of this conversation. And I would like to kind of start by juxtaposing two concepts that I heard kind of repeatedly throughout, which is on one hand, we have allyship as being able to leverage your power, use your voice. But then on the other hand, we hear everyone can be an ally, and allyship is really everyday behavior. So I think a lot of times people hear, oh, I need to be an ally, and I don't know where to start. You know, what can I do? I can't make sure somebody gets hired, or I'm not in charge of promotions. But it's really kind of a smaller everyday actions, and recognizing that we are all powerful in some regard. You know, Lisandra touched on the point. She's an ally to new associates at the firm, or can be. You know, you have partner allies who are your peers, but of course you can be an ally to someone who's new at the firm, very junior, and it goes upwards. You have allies who are still helping you just because you're a partner. The journey does not stop, right? So can we talk a little bit more about maybe mixing these concepts and looking at some everyday behaviors, particularly in the context of recruitment and retention? Like, once we get people in the door, how do we keep them in the door? What do these everyday actions look like? And how can we translate these concepts into things that we're actually doing? And this won't be an ABC order, so anybody jump in.
Well, I'm happy to start. I know that, you know, I've mentioned this before some of our previous conversations. I think that sort of any longstanding institution, not just law firms, but any institution that's been in place for a very long time, they are all not so great at purchasing loyalty for women and people of color. And I don't mean that to sound as transactional as it might seem, but there is a purchase of loyalty that comes about when you're dealing with people who are in a system where they don't see a lot of themselves mirrored in leadership, right? They're constantly looking for ways to be reaffirmed that their values are aligning with the values of the organization. And so I think institutions like law firms, or, like any sort of, like I said, longstanding, institution. And I don't mean just like the age of a law firm. I just mean the law firm structure, for instance. It's very bad at figuring out what it means to purchase that loyalty. A lot of times it's, oh, well, we'll just pay people more and that purchases their loyalty, but it doesn't. It doesn't at all. And I think it's sort of hard to reconcile that when you see the attrition numbers for women and for associates and just attorneys of color, and you go, well, we pay lockstep. We don't understand why we're having this retention problem. You aren't going about the business of purchasing loyalty through signaling that the organization's values are aligning with their values, and then reinforcing that, not just during, International Women's Day or Black History Month or Juneteenth, or, on a particular day, but like constantly reinforcing and sending the message that, yes, we are who we say we are from a diversity perspective. And we may not always be perfect. We may not always get it right, but you're in the right place. Your values are aligning with our values. And we're okay with you calling us on it when they don't, right? And I think that purchase of loyalty is a big part of allyship, because you're looking for ways as an ally for the organization, and I mean organization with a big O, meaning like the entire firm, but also organization like the team that person is working on. You're looking for ways to help those organizations constantly send the right signals about the fact that the values are aligning, that we really do want you here. We do believe in diversity. We're not hiring people who are different and then, putting them in bad positions and making them leave because they're not the same. I think that's a big problem at large organizations. But we really want to value your differences in more than just a mission statement. And so I think allyship is, you may not even be talking about anything related to race or gender or sexual orientation or anything, but you see the organization's values not aligning, right? And you go, wait a minute, if we're saying this, shouldn't we be doing that? That's what I think of as sort of that constant day-to-day allyship that really kind of makes a difference in organizations.
Yeah, and just to add a quick comment on that, and something that Lauren mentioned already, right? Like this notion that you also, like your everyday actions also matter. And I think purchasing loyalty, it also involves what you do on a daily basis, right? So making sure you give credit if someone has the voice in a meeting or a phone call, saying someone else's name that, did all the work, for example. That may be like a very simple thing to do, but I think that's part of purchasing loyalty. Shows that you care, shows that you're recognizing someone else, right? So it's like everyday little behaviors that also make an impact.
Right, and that can help, that is the way that the culture kind of changes, and you can ensure that your values are aligning, your organizational values are aligning. And this is how organizations' values change, right? For the better. The organization is nothing but the people who are part of the organization. And so to change culture, if you're thinking, well, I might be at the wrong place because I'm not sure my morals and values align with my organization's, everyone can have a role in changing those values and influencing those values. So the organization is a mirror, Shelley, you mentioned that you are at a foreign parented company and you were surprised to be having these conversations on Juneteenth. How have you seen kind of the evolution of this conversation from the time you've been at the company? And do you think, speaking of mirroring, what happens at the top in terms of leadership and who's in charge has brought kind of some changes to bear within the conversation?
So thank you, Lauren. Our company has a 250-year legacy of being Swiss. And when I first joined Novartis, it was very diverse, but in a different way, right? We're global. So we have everyone in each country, but it wasn't, I think, for me, that really hit me that diversity and inclusion was a big pillar of our company until around 18 months ago. Our global CEO is actually an Indian American. And he's a doctor, PhD, amazing scientist. So not usually a CEO type, but that's what we said. And he's really, I think allyship is like from top down. I've seen over the 18 months. And when we had our event, I thought, oh, we're just gonna have some slides, your typical corporate type of event. And we had professors on and they gave a history lesson. And at one point I was like, wait a second, this is bringing me back to college, because I took African-American studies, I took Jewish studies, I took every study you could think of. But I thought it was amazing because, and then they really talked about things like generational trauma, things that weren't like healthcare Novartis-like. And for me, I was like, to green light that and have that openness and honesty to allow that, because I thought to myself, with legal, meaning the legal department, would they even clear something like this in the past? And they were like, it's open forum. And it was 4,000 associates in the US joined. We only have, I was shocked that many people on a Friday afternoon joined for 2 hours. But that being said, I think Novartis, they're smart about it, right? I thought about it some more. The reason why I think it's been part of our model, especially recently, is the talent is in all these very various diverse groups, meaning I'm thinking about not law as much, but meaning our scientists. They come from all over. And I think in order to keep them from a business standpoint, we've done a lot in the way of changing our culture. So our CEO, our new CEO, has talked a lot about unbossing, and D&I is a big part of that in order to attract and retain. So I've been told we are good at attracting, but not retaining, being that we are a 100,000 associate company, so we're huge. So I think my thing is that being at a foreign company, I used to think, oh, we're not gonna really adapt well in all this changing environment, because we are very diverse in the sense that we're a global company. But we're doing, I think, I'm not that I'm amazed, I wanna say we're doing a good job, but I think more needs to be done. And this, recent events, I think, has made our company and our top-down leadership make that commitment.
That's interesting, and I think you raised, this is another point that we talked about within our group, just the economic component of diversity and how much sense it makes from a purely business perspective. You want the best talent. The best talent cannot reside within only a very small subset of the population. Just from a sheer numbers standpoint, that's not how it works. So thinking about that in terms of, from a corporate standpoint, from a law firm standpoint, we want to be diverse, not only because it's the right thing to do, but now we're seeing even in the legal community, a lot of clients are demanding that their service providers be diverse. And you also raised a good point about retention. So I'd like to get two perspectives here, one from May and also one from Nita, about what allyship looks like in terms of getting people in the door, but also making sure that they can thrive once they get in the door. And I think it looks a little bit different when you're thinking about public sector versus private sector tax roles. So whoever would like to start, I think it'd be good.
Right. I was going to say, so thank you, Lauren, and that's very interesting. And I wanted to sort of introduce the aspect from the federal side, from the federal government. And I didn't introduce myself when I first spoke, but I'm Mei Lu, and I'm the acting Deputy Associate Chief Counsel in Washington, D.C. and with the IRS. And so in the federal government is a little bit more unique, because we don't have sort of the resources to offer a higher pay necessarily in all cases. And so we've got, but at the same time, we've got sort of diversity in the fabric of who we are, right? I mean, we are federal government. And I think that thinking about the situation I'm in, I think Chief Counsel's office is quite diverse and very open to diversity. And I think that particularly within our division, which is an international, I count myself quite lucky. We've got sort of leadership that really celebrates diversity. And I think we've got a diverse office. Can it be more diverse? Of course it can be. I think as far as the three prongs, right, of continuing to think about it every day, there's the hiring, there's the promotional aspects, the retention, and I think that we do a good job, or at least we try to do a good job on a day-to-day with mentoring. I mean, I think when we get new attorneys on board, we will oftentimes, well, all times, I think we offer them opportunities to get work that's engaging, and we have mentors assigned to each one of them, so that they do have from day one the ability to really flourish. And so I think in the federal government situation, I think is a little different, and I think in a way I think we start from at least in my view, a level playing field where everybody really has a chance, and I've seen successes sort of within our organization and in the higher executive level, and so in that aspect, I know that we can't stop thinking about it. I think it's a day-to-day thing, but I think we're in a good place.
And that's great to hear, May. I think that's why you have a lot of people who stick with the government, because it is a great place to work and they do feel the support. And just from, public accounting, which I think is similar to big law in a lot of respects. I work for a very old established organization that's great at recruiting because of the name of the firm, and has, no problems getting interns, associates through the door. But retention is not as good as, one would hope. And the current U.S. chairman and senior partner, he is very interested in diversity and inclusion, and has been so for a while, to the extent that over the past couple of years, he's been regularly posting on LinkedIn, just, his thoughts on diversity and inclusion, and also trying to, ask the question, how do we continue to be more diverse? Because even if you're good at the recruiting, you could always be better at that aspect. And then the retention, I think, to some of the comments earlier, the purchasing loyalty, showing that there are people in higher positions that that diverse people can aspire and look up to and share common interests with. That's just not where it should be. And I'm hoping, and one thing I should note, and came to mind earlier, change is hard. And we're now just constantly having to address and deal with change. And what I've been trying to think through with our diversity and inclusion committee, and with the aspect of perhaps not having as much difficulty with recruiting, because I work for a long, an established organization, but the retention, how can we utilize what we're learning now with change to retain the folks who oftentimes after 3 years would not view my organization as the fit? And, that stems from not just not providing opportunities, not showing that there's something to aspire, where there are people that look like, some of our diverse recruits, but also just, it is, I think, human nature to tend to go to people that you've worked with before and not try to work with new folks. It doesn't matter what the color, shape, size of the person is, but right now we're not all together in the same room where you just have your path to the copier and you put down a file to the with the associate who's closest to the copier. And so how can we utilize what we're going through now in all of this change to really reach out to folks that we haven't worked with, because it's not the way that they look, just they're not in our path, and try to do that. And I honestly believe it could help with the retention. It's not just seeing that there's someone who looks like you, because I do think that is something that we need to work on more, but reaching out to folks that you wouldn't work with because we all have busy days. But now the opportunity is, you know, putting aside the digital divide, but the opportunity is there to reach out to others. And then also from the recruitment standpoint, recruiting is expensive, and having events, going to, you know, colleges where firms have historically recruited from. Once again, change is hard. We could pivot from that, because now we're doing recruiting online, and tap into universities, you know, locations that perhaps we weren't utilizing in order to recruit more diverse recruits as well. So while not quite where the federal government is, I think this is an opportunity to get there and perhaps even go further in the private sector.
Those are great points from both of you guys. And I think, Nita, to your point, you know, we're experiencing some real disruption in the world, in our lives, professional and personal. So we can use this as an opportunity. Disruption is the best time to, you know, if we were in the Valley, everybody likes disruption when they're talking about a startup entering the market. You're changing the way things are being done, and it's a good thing. Disruption is a good thing. So we can use this to our benefit. But I also heard, and this is, I think, you know, we may have been selling kind of a false bill of goods with allyship up to this point, because we're making it sound like it's easy and fun and nice, and everybody just does it. It is hard. Being an ally means you are probably going to be uncomfortable, and that is regardless of your position. So, you know, as from beginning to end of your career, you have many opportunities to be an ally, and probably 99% of them will not feel very comfortable because it involves asking people to think differently about how they're doing something. And it really, you know, we have to hold each other accountable, whether it's our organization writ large, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a really good friend with whom we work, and we are just, it's tough. You know, you're going to have some conversations about, should we be bringing this up in a performance review setting? Is this relevant? You know, have we thought about where we're recruiting? Why do we always go to these same schools? What standards are we looking for, and how can we apply these standards to a different group of people and get a different recruited class in for interviews or as summer associates or what have you? So these are points that I think are certainly worth mentioning, but it's not always going to be easy to be an ally. And I think, you know, it is small everyday behaviors, and it doesn't have to be any grand gesture, but sometimes the smallest things are the hardest ones to do. So moving forward, and you also mentioned just kind of the digital divide and working remotely. And so I do think that this is an important time where we can kind of break our patterns with respect to giving people opportunities to shine. You know, it's hard to be a young or even an older practitioner and be able to prove your worth if you don't have the chance to do it, right? So complicated projects, thorny issues, high profile projects. Lisandra mentioned giving attribution. That can be uncomfortable if you don't want to have to be in a position of admitting that you haven't done the work, but it's worth doing. You know, it puts our colleagues in a different light in front of clients or other stakeholders, and it's important, totally important. So moving forward, I think we've touched on a lot. I wanted to kind of shift our focus, and we discussed earlier kind of an internal and an external approach to allyship. So there are things that, you know, we as individuals can do. There are also things that the organization can do. I think this also ties a little bit into making a business case for diversity and inclusion efforts. Would anybody like to kind of expand on this concept and talk about what that means within your particular organization?
Sure. I think I may have brought that up. So I'm happy to do that. I do think that there is there's an internal and an external allyship, or you can think of it as, I think of it as kind of a micro and a macro allyship. Like there's sort of that micro allyship, and that's where the real work gets done, right? You kind of, you bear down and you leverage that power. I'm also a huge advocate of leveraging that power with a goal. My allies who have been the best allies have, one of them, I call her, she's like a commando ally. She was a client, and I didn't even know how much of an ally she was, because her goal was to make sure that I made partner. And she didn't start out telling me that that was her goal, because she knew I would have been like, I'm not doing that. But that was her goal. And so her allyship was very focused. And it was an allyship one-on-one with me, but she was also being an ally for me with other people in my organization that I didn't even know about, and encouraging them to ally. And so I think that sort of micro allyship is really, really important. I also think from a macro level, I think that as an organization, either individually as a representative of the organization, you can go out and be an ally. You can be the face of the organization, make sure that the values of the organization are showing through, whether it's to the community, whether it's through clients. But again, that gets back to the purchasing loyalty, right? I can't be an ally for my organization if I don't truly feel that my organization's values align with mine. And so that's where you get to the point where when companies, one of the things I think companies, when I say companies, I really mean law firms, but because I've never worked in a corporate setting. So one of the things that I think law firms sometimes get wrong is that you kind of forget that if there's no one who can really be an ally for these principles to the outside world, because your values aren't aligning with what you say your values are around diversity and inclusion, retention, making sure that you are valuing difference and all of that stuff, it's hurting you. It's hurting you. People are hearing when you send women, people of color out on a pitch or to speak in something like this, people hear in their voice if they're being tentative about your organization's commitment, and that reads through. So you want to build allyship on behalf of your organization too, and not just with women and people of color. You also need cis white men to be able to speak the language of the values associated with your stance on diversity and be an ally for the organization in that space, just like they can talk about the virtues of like how great this particular practice group is, or all of the different client service things that we can do as part of the relationship. They should be just as facile with the language around diversity and to advocate on behalf of the organization and leverage their power in a certain space on behalf of the organization in the exact same way around D&I. So I think there is an internal and external facing portion to it. And Lauren, like you said, that goes to the business case associated with it. Because like I said, you hear that tentativeness in people's voices when they're not quite sure if they can truly be an ally for their organization, and they're asked to go out and talk about, can you talk about our D&I efforts? Can you talk about all the things that we do? You hear that sort of hesitation, like, well, I can, but And so it's very important that organizations think about, how are we purchasing that loyalty? How are we aligning with values? How are we really building our people up so that they can truly be allies for the organization externally as well?
Right. So it really translates into feeling good. Purchasing this loyalty is really feeling good about where you work, where you spend the majority of your time, the people with whom you spend the majority of that time, and really thinking about, and that's a dangerous place to be in from an organizational standpoint, right? You do not want people going out into the world representing your organization and you are not sure what they are going to say. That's a huge risk. And so those are all great points, and I really think that it underscores kind of several themes that we have running throughout this conversation, right? Purchasing the loyalty, that kind of reinforcing, it's a cycle, and so reinforcing from internal behaviors, as well as reflecting back on the organization, and also things that we can all do. And that goes to your original point, Vanessa, also about people advocating for you in spaces that you don't have access to. And so that's where I think a lot of people think being an ally means only people who look like you will be an ally, or only the same people of your same level if you're in a hierarchical organization. That is not the case. You know, you've got to kind of spread the seed far and wide and hope that the plant grows. But those are all good points. Does anyone else have any comments they would like to add on this or anything from our panel?
Well, you know, Lauren, one thing that Vanessa brought up last week that has stuck with me, you know, just not wanting the pressure on the women and the diverse, you know, staff to come up with ways to feel more included or to come up with the agenda. It's really putting the onus on everyone. And, you know, I've been thinking about that for a week now. And then when she, at the top of the call, when we were talking about an event that she pulled together, Vanessa, I don't know how you have time to do all of this. It just, and any tips or any energy that you can share with me would be greatly appreciated. But how you were talking to some of your male colleagues after the event, and they were like, gosh, I wish I would have said something. And I think also now trying to get people to say something and helping with that vocabulary, helping ask the questions that we just don't ask, because prior to, you know, the current moment, you would show support by not pointing out someone was different. And that's just not the case anymore. You have to talk about the differences. And, you know, the tools that we can utilize, as Shelley noted, bringing professors in, bringing people to actually teach us the language and how to change the language could be very helpful from both, you know, an internal and external perspective. So I just wanted to add that.
No, that's an excellent point. I do think I've heard similar feedback. I think people are very worried about saying or doing the wrong thing. And in the context of allyship, I would argue that doing something is better than nothing. And so, you know, maybe you don't articulate it in the most artful fashion, or, you know, but if you're trying to help someone, you're genuinely trying to help someone, I don't think there's a lot of space for people to get upset with that. You know, your intentions are good, they're there. I would encourage people to make the effort and worry about smoothing over potentially hurt feelings later. In the absence of a toolkit or a playbook, because there, as far as I know, isn't really one. So we're all winging it, and it's important to, you know, step into the discomfort and try to really make some changes here. Does anybody else have any comments, or do we have? I don't know if we have received any questions in the chat box. But where's Heather, our fearless leader? No questions? We don't have any questions.
No questions from the chat box.
Okay.
Let me just make, since we have some time, let me just make a point. I've been listening, and I think that although it's really important for each of us to, you know, to have a voice and to take a stand on a daily basis, it really comes from the higher level leaders, right? I mean, they need to set the right tone, really, to in the organizational setting to make it work, and we see that sort of time and time again, and so I think that it's important to have leaders that understand the, you know, the situation, understand the reasons for promoting diversity, and sort of, you know, keeping that on sort of a daily practice sort of thing for the organization. So just wanted to point that out as well.
No, that's an excellent point, Nate. I think Lisandra alluded to this a little bit earlier, just with regard to safe spaces, you know, being free to kind of, and Vanessa also calling the organization to task in case things are not going the way that they need to be going, but also for younger folks having the freedom to kind of ask for what they need and know that they will be heard. and respected with regard to support. And this goes also to retention. It's all circular. See how this all works out here.
I have a question.
Go
No.
ahead, Heather.
Go ahead, and Lisandra, it looks like she was about to say something, so.
Yeah, no, just to add to what Lauren was saying and reflecting sort of on like my own very short career so far, I think it's like very, very important for leadership to be aware of how crucial it is to be committed to everyone's professional development, and to like make sure that we actually have systems in place to make sure that people are getting the tools that they need and are getting the opportunities that they need to succeed and grow within the organization, right? Like, to me, there's so many benefits that come from making sure that everyone is getting, you know, equally challenging and high profile and important work assignments and opportunities. That's going to empower people to speak up, right? Back to the point that Lauren was just making about a safe space and making sure that we have an inclusive environment where you need to kind of give people that confidence and that voice. And that's going to come from many different places. But in my view, like kind of that professional development and empowerment that comes from that is really critical. And you know, that's one area where having allies could have a very important impact, right? To the extent your ally is part of that conversation and making sure that you're getting the work that you need to get, and it's in the room when you're not, that's something that is, you know, everyone should be aware of.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Oh,
This is Joan. Lauren, can I ask a question? I can't figure out how to make the chat room work.
Sure, please.
Sorry. I would just like to make an observation that what I've learned over the years in terms of needing to pressure test on a fairly frequent basis my own assumptions about what my organizations are doing and what other organizations are doing, because I would get lulled into a bit of complacency and just ease. And needing people to kick me and say, no, you can't be that ease. You have to be looking more appropriately. And looking for people who will help me make that outreach. So I have one example in particular. The ABA about 5-6 years ago put in a requirement that if you wanted to give CLE for a program, you had to meet certain diversity requirements on the panel. So if you had a panel of 4, at least one person had to be diverse. We were lawyers, we were all up in arms about how do you know whether someone's diverse? Yes, you can look at their skin tone. It's a little hard if it's anything other than the skin tone to decide if they're diverse. And many of us were railing against that because it was inconvenient. In large part, it was inconvenient. May, I'm going to take a little bit of a question in terms of some of the comments that you made. One of the problems that we had is that when we ask for speakers for panels, more often than not, we get white men. And I will say that I've had some outreach from some women at the government who've said, how do I make myself more available? How do I get myself more out there? So I've been working with them a little bit. But then the best thing that happened to me is that we're sitting in a council meeting. And I was sitting there and I'm thinking, oh God, this is annoying. It's another requirement. We're trying to figure out how to comply with it. And Julie DeVola spoke up. And she said, wait a minute. I have been the beneficiary in my career of having been, well, we need a woman. Let's get a woman on the panel. Let's get Julie. And she said, I think it's one of the best things that's happened to me. And I sat there and I sat back and I said, she's absolutely right. And I've been not looking for a reason to say yes. I've been looking to stay in my comfort zone. And that changed a whole lot for me, not just my support of the diversity requirement for the ABA, which, by the way, we have managed to deal with very successfully. It hasn't been a problem. It's been a little bit more work, but it's been great. But Julie's statement not only made that work, but it has made me much more vocal when I see something that needs to occur. And I think that if Julie could do that to me, and I can do that to people today on the phone and say, it's okay, you can just speak up, that maybe that's what we take from this, and maybe that's what I think of as allyship these days. So I'll just stop there. And someday I'll learn how to use the chat function. Sorry.
Thank you, Joan. I think it's a great evidence of how you came to become more of an ally in your professional setting, and the discomfort, right? So it was not something you really wanted to deal with until someone said, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I was able to benefit, and you're like, wait a minute. Well, if she was,
and so was I, obviously. I just hadn't thought about it.
Exactly. I probably was too. Maybe I need to think about this a little differently. So I think that's great. It's a great example of it's not a huge, it was a watershed moment for you, but it was someone's very, very simple statement.
And what if there were no women in the room then, when that conversation was going on? That's what I'm talking about having a table. If there are no women in that room when that conversation is going on, and there's no one to raise their hand to say, hey, look, I benefited from this, and to make people think about this differently, you just stay within that system that's not really structured. Actually, I'm going to put it a different way, is structured to gatekeep.
Yes.
It's not intentionally structured to gatekeep, usually, hopefully, but it's structured to gatekeep. And if you don't have anyone else at the table who can raise their hand and say something because of their lived experience in the organization or whatever, then that's when those systems just don't change at all. And then people go, well, we just can't find any qualified women, or we can't find any qualified people of color, but you just aren't thinking about this differently in a way that will really allow people to challenge the structures and to make sort of institutional changes. Those always hurt, because we've all benefited from our institutions in one way or another. So to say now there was something wrong with that institution that helped you kind of ascend up the ladder, it takes a lot for people. And the easier sort of that ascent has, or the less obstacle ridden that ascent has been, the harder it is to believe that structure needs to change.
Right. We have a question from one of our participants directed to all of the panelists. What do you think of taking the initiative and asking my group leader to address and start a D&I conversation with our immediate team, even if those leaders are not people of color? And then there is an addition, although it makes sense that D&I leaders are people of color and they lead the conversation generally in D&I forums, I haven't heard other leaders who are not people of color.
I'll speak up because apparently I can't keep quiet. I think that it's not just a good idea, it's absolutely necessary, because it's not just people of color. Anyone who is aligning with the inequities that we're seeing going on right now, if they're looking at their organization, again, big O organization or little O like team, silence is being interpreted as you're complacent, you don't care, you don't think this is an issue. Something along that spectrum, all the way up to, this is silly, this is a waste of everybody's time. And I think leaders, it behooves them right now to challenge that. However, it feels authentic to the organization to challenge it, though. So if having a group discussion is the way to do it, where everyone gets a chance to talk, and that's authentic for the organization, I think that's what you should do. If your organization tends to be a little bit more collegial and kind of closed and not comfortable with having those conversations, maybe starting out with something that's more lecture-like that will spur some conversation is a better way to start. I think that it all depends on where the organization is. If you're at Diversity 101, you don't want to jump into a discussion led by, Ibrahim Kendi around how to be an anti-racist. You can't go from 0 to 100 because people are going to repel. the organization has to be brought along, just like people, you got to meet the organization where it is the way you have to meet people where they are. And so figuring out where the organization is and what feels authentic with starting that discussion is sort of where you start. But I think every organization, if they're going to come through this, retaining their diverse talent and being able to, again, purchase that loyalty, they've got to do something.
I think that's a really good, a good response. And I would also note that I don't think that you necessarily need people of color to have a D&I conversation, right? So if it matters to you and you are not a person of color, you can still have that conversation. You can still ask your organization to care about this issue. We all have skin in this game. And we have one last question from someone who says, I'm African-American and a second-year associate at a national law firm. Does anyone on the panel have recommendations for young minority associates who have white partners who do not appear comfortable with discussing issues of race? That is a tough one. I think if these are the only partners with whom you work, that might be tough. But you can expand your search. It doesn't necessarily have to be the partners with whom you have the most direct contact. I would look for leaders within the organization who are at least amenable to having a conversation. This is, I started out by saying allyship has nothing to do with blaming and shaming. It's not a pointing fingers kind of conversation. We just need to get to a place where we can foster diversity and inclusiveness in this organization and make sure that we are the best version of ourselves that we can be. And so I would encourage you to try to find somebody within your organization who is in agreement with that statement. And if you can't, you should probably find somewhere else to work. So let's see. Do we have any? We're getting some good feedback. People have enjoyed the conversation, and we are at 3:30, so I don't want to keep people beyond our time. Do we have any last closing impressions from our panelists or Heather before we close? I would just like to reiterate my thanks to our panelists and to Heather and the Women in Tax Forum for hosting us today. I think this has been a great conversation. Hopefully it can continue. We will be in touch about next steps. All right, thank you. I'll turn it over to Heather for some last minute, if she has any last minute closings.
Thank you all. No last minute. Love to end on time. There were some great comments that we didn't get to in the chat function as well, but there's great resources that were posted there too. Make sure to check out the chat string conversation for everyone. But really grateful for and so honored that each of the panelists was here today. Thank you very, very much. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.